Hi-de-ho, neighborinos. It's Bill Little here with the Stratosphere Lounge, episode number 64. Where do we come up with pixels like these? I don't know. It's I still can't believe it. 64 episodes of somnambulistic glory, guaranteed to put people in extreme pain into medically induced comas. But we're having fun, and I have to tell you, we've been doing the Deep Thoughts edition. This is part 2, and I pulled more questions that I didn't get to last week, and I've got a bunch of great questions this week, and I won't get to all of them tonight either, because we're going to do probably 90 minutes top end, maybe be out of here at 7:30, quarter to 8. But I've decided that what I'm going to do is I'm not going to take any new ones, but I'm going to get through these 3 pages of awesomeness, because they're terrific. So we may have to do a part 3 next week, but I won't take any new questions. I'll just try and work my way through these, and then after that, we will definitely do a video game episode, because people have been calling for that forever, and overdue for that. So we'll see if we can get to that. Just before we get rolling here, I had a really interesting afterburner day today. I didn't have anything last night. Tuesday morning is when we go and shoot my PJTV day. So Tuesday morning is when I do Trifecta and Hot Seat, and every other week I do an afterburner. And went to bed last night, I had nothing. Woke up this morning, and I could just check Drudge, and I saw a little story buried in there, and bam, out it came. It was terrific. I thought it was really good, one of the best ones I've done, and had a lot of punch to it. So that tells me I can do these more often. The questions that we get here, just in general, but these, especially when we're asking for like deep questions, are really profound. And one of the things we're going to be doing, I know it's taken a long time to get all this stuff diced. We had the encoding errors with the DVD master. We just get those things back out the door. Once that's out the door delivered, I can relax and start cranking out firewalls again. But we were talking about doing a members-only segment called Time Over Target. And I think there's probably a world where we can do, some kind of Stratosphere Lounge type questions, or do the show a little more often or something. I don't know. I love doing it, and it's the show's just it's a no-brainer with these kind of questions. They're really fantastic questions. I'm looking through the list here. We've got, I think we've got like 60, 75, 80, 200, 396 questions here, and 393 of them are from the Tiemans brothers, but 3 of them aren't, so we'll be able to get to some of them. And I got to tell you, I know we have a joke about the Tiemans brothers here. There's, I assume they're brothers, but Zechariah, Joshua, and Isaac. And I don't know what they're feeding those Tiemans. I don't know where they are. I don't know what they're getting or doing. But I'll tell you what, they're consistently just really great questions. So there you go. I'm going to blue this out just a little bit. See, that's a little bit nicer on the playback. See, the nice thing about this hue thing is kind of cool. Get to play around that a little bit. So let's get going. We got a whole lot of show to do, and we've only got 81 minutes left to go. So we're going to start with a question from a guy named Zachariah Tiemans, who says, what is the best case you can make against the Internet as it now stands? It's a great question. I would say there's 2 things. The case against the Internet in general, I think, that you could make is that the Internet is proof that human nature is conservative and not liberal, only because we tend to think that human nature is inherently flawed. As I think I said not too long ago, the fact that you can not only have all the information ever known to human beings at your fingertips, and also be able to get basically a free education, including a free technical education. And the fact that all people use it for is gaming, Facebook, and porn is telling me that there's something about that goes to the liberal issue of, if we just gave people more money and free health care, then they'd all be able to get college educations, and they'd sit around and they'd paint and they'd do art and they'd get engineering degrees and all. No, they'd sit around and they'd watch Oprah, and that's how life works, and that's how it is. And I'm that way too. I'm not trying to make the case that I'm any different than that. I keep thinking, oh, great, I got Christmas break here, so that's 14 days or something, or 16 days, and I'm going to get 3 screenplays done, and I'm going to get all this other stuff actually done and accomplished and taken care of. And the next thing I know, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sitting on my couch, and it's like, yeah, I'll get started on that. Oh, hey, look, it's a WKRP in Cincinnati marathon. I think I'll spend the next 3 days watching that. So the case against the internet is on a sort of a not superficial, sort of a upper level case against it is it does show that human nature does tend to take the easy road out. I can remember libraries and things like that. And certainly for me, it's a life-changing experience, the internet. Guys like me live on the internet. Not only do I come to you on the internet, but everything that comes to me comes through the internet. So there's that. But I think on a much more easy to digest level, I think the internet is really, really messing with how we think. I really think it's changing the way humans think. Because I'm kind of a conservative, I believe that the hardware it's changeable, but it's changeable over literally over millions of years. The hardware doesn't change over millennia. The hardware doesn't change over tens of thousands of years. The hardware changes over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. So the hardware is the same. There's no fundamental difference between me and a Greek, Helot, and there's no fundamental difference really between me and a Bronze Age guy from Great Britain in 40,000 BC. We're pretty much got the same hardware. The education is different. The language and all these other things are different. The amount of mental stimulation you get is different. So the software is different. And people have, it's widely been discussed that up until the 20th century, the speed of the horse was the top speed of mankind. And it's been the top speed of mankind for hundreds of thousands of years, or however long horses have been domesticated. Certainly for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The speed of a running horse was as fast as humans could go. Prior to that, it was as fast as your legs could take you. And then along comes the 20th century, into the 19th century, I guess. And you start doing, all of a sudden, now you're doing, 30 miles an hour consistently, then 40, then 100, then 150, then 200, then 300, then 500, then, now we all do 500 miles an hour. It's not one of us who's really watching this show has never been in an airplane. I wouldn't imagine that traveling a jet from coast to coast, you're moving at 560 miles an hour over the ground. And up to 3,000 miles an hour for airplane, and guys who've gone to the moon are doing 24,000 miles an hour. So human speed has increased because of this, and so I think also has the time frame that humans think in. Prior to the invention of the industrial era, when everybody was living on farms, you really, you came in at sunset and you met people in the evening and all. What time you'll be by? I'll be by in the afternoon. Then all of a sudden, you have the industrial era and you have clocks, and I'll see you at 4 o'clock. And now we have, with the internet and our lives are getting so dense and so scheduled, it's like I've got a call at 4:12 and pick something up at 4:25 and that sort of thing. But even that's not where I'm going with this. What I'm really trying to say is the internet is so vast. It's endless. It's bottomless. So there is nothing but choices. And I'm guilty of this myself, but I watch millennials do this, and they're much worse at it than I am. When you go to YouTube or something, you no longer have an attention span of a half an hour, even as if you're watching a half-hour TV show. Most people who are browsing the internet or looking at YouTube have an attention span in a minute or two. And frankly, the problem with the internet is there are so many choices, nobody finishes anything. And why would you? You don't, if you're watching an internet show and it's a sketch, it's kind of funny, it's not like you've got 2 other channels or 3 other channels or even 15. It's endless. You'll never get to the end of the internet. And so I think with all of these choices, people just spend more and more time browsing, more and more time grazing, and less time thinking, and less time even watching things. So you're not even getting the beginning and ending of stories anymore. Even little stories don't begin and end anymore. One of the popularities of these vines, these 6 or 8 second videos, is it's an 8-second video, or 6-second. I guess it's a 6-second video for a vine. And so you got to tell a story in 6 seconds. And sure enough, you can, but it's not a terribly deep story, and you don't learn an awful lot about life. So I think the problem with the internet is it's making us nuts, and it's destroying our attention span, and it's certainly destroying our willingness to dig into difficult material. It's just too easy to bounce off of it. Some of these books to give me the basis for what I, eventually try to work into the work that I do. Some of the stuff's not easy. Some of it is easy. Churchill biography is in 3 pieces, and each volume is 2,000-3,000 pages. There's 3 volumes in the Civil War trilogy. They're each about 2,000 or 3,000 pages. That's a fun read. I enjoyed. That's just pleasure for me. But things like RK are very difficult. They require you got to just kind of plow through it. And I think if that had happened to me, if I'd been born, in 1985 instead of 1959, I don't know if I'd have the patience to go through it. I really don't. So I think that's what I would say is it's the internet has provided so many choices of so many different kinds of materials that no one is willing to tolerate a slow spot, a hard spot, a difficult spot. They just bounce off, something else going on. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing so much autism. I think the pace of information processing is really catching up to us. I don't think anybody just sits out and thinks anymore. I don't think anybody just sits there and thinks. I don't think they talk much anymore either. Because I've texted people, and I'm not super fast on the text, but I can text people. And texting is not conversing. I used to, when you're at that age where you're having your friends and you're doing sleepovers and stuff, and, we used to go around and walk around the neighborhood at midnight and come back at 2:30, 3 in the morning. We just sit out and talk for 3.5, 4 hours in our cars or whatever, and just get deep and learn about things. I don't see any of that going on today, and I think it's a real problem. I think the other problem too, not directly attributable to the internet, but to the pace of our modern society, comes down to play. It used to be you could just go out and play. In fact, you're expected to go out and play, be home by dark. Now, you can't really have a friend at school and just like, well, hey, you want to just come out, hang out after school? No. Now you have to have play dates. Now you have to have mom, gets in touch with that. Well, what's Johnny's mom's name? Get her number. Hi, Jody. Yeah, this is Louisa. This is Jordan's mom. How's Thursday from 6:30 to 7? How does is it 6:30 to? Can we do 6:30 to 8? It's like these kids are so overscheduled. They've got their piano lessons, they've got their hockey lessons, they've got their soccer lessons, they've got their this. They're taking their judo, and it's like everything's structured. Everything is ordered and structured. Nothing's spontaneous, and nothing's There's no real intellectual freedom and no imagination. When I was a kid, this is a pen. We would make like, okay, here's a pen. We used to use a ruler, but here's a business card, and you're just like, oh look, now I have a fighter airplane, and it's got a detachable nose section here for reentry, so that as we begin to approach the Earth's atmosphere, this is the fuel core that is ejected on reentry, and then the capsule. You see, the capsule comes in at a very steep angle. The parachute deploys. That is the result of having pretty crappy tools to work with compared to some of the graphics we see today. But it means that the graphics are up here, and it means that all this invention stuff happens up here, and it's, that's what got us all of this stuff, is this ability to go out and think about things and imagine things. That's not to say that these people working on video games today don't have imaginations. There's tremendous imaginations in some of this. But what they're really doing is the people who are imagining just for the sake of an example, The people who are imagining like a really great level on a first-person shooter are intentionally depriving the people who are spending hours and hours and hours and hours playing those games of the imagination of having to come up with one of those in their head. And that's not usually a good thing. And the last thing I'll say about this train of thought is it is occasionally a good thing because if you read like Lord of the Rings, for example, I have a pretty good imagination. I can imagine a lot of what I read in the book and imagine it. So I hadn't read the Lord of the Rings trilogy before I saw the movies. I saw the first movie and really put the hook in me, and then I read the books. But I hadn't seen them prior. I hadn't read the books prior. But I had read The Hobbit, and I had read The Hobbit a couple times before the Hobbit movies started to come out. And so I had an imagination view in my head of The Hobbit, of the world of The Hobbit. I had an idea of what inside Erebor looked like. I had an idea of what Smaug looked like. I had an idea of all this other stuff. And my imagination was no match for the 40 or 50 or 200 or whatever professional imaginations that are working on that movie. They would show me things that I just never was like, holy cow, it's awesome. So I don't mean to make it all a bad thing, but I think on balance, the mental pace is picking up. The concentration span is going down. Depth of communication is going down. People are communicating much more often on a much shallower level than we used to. And no one seems to sit out and go fishing or sit on a rock or a dock or a log or whatever and just think about things. Nobody seems to be reflecting much anymore. And I would say a lot of that's due to this damned internet. You could all be reflecting right now. You could be sitting around thinking about deep thoughts. Instead, you're listening to me. What a sad indictment against the state of human consciousness. Boy, I'll tell you what. Amanda Nicole Guideson wants to know, how is Schrodinger's cat? Schrodinger's cat is so-so. That's how Schrodinger's cat is doing, Amanda. For those of you not familiar with Schrodinger's cat, Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment that really is the classic thought experiment that deals with the unusual's soft term for what it is, the remarkable, the astonishing understanding that we have when we get into quantum theory. And quantum really does seem to be how the world is built. So we live in a world very far up above the smallest of these quantum actions. And so the world seems very ordered and predictable to us. I talked about this, I think, a week or two ago. If I drop a pen, hey, look, it fell. What do you know? It's going to fall pretty much every time, right? Every time I drop this pen, pen's going to fall. So the chance of the pen hitting the ground, if I drop it, of it falling, the chance of the pen falling is 100%, right? Not quite. Not quite. Quantum tells us that there is an infinitesimally small chance. The more molecules and interactions involved, the higher the odds go. But quantum tells us that it is theoretically possible that these things will all, as it's being dropped, randomly move in one direction instead of in all these multiple canceling out directions, and the pen won't drop at all. It'll actually go up. Chance of that happening is so close to being zero that it's zero, but it's not zero. It's not. And so one of these thought experiments that deal with the bizarre. When I say bizarre, I mean really the nature of the universe appears to be in such a way that we can't really understand it. All we can do is have we talked about this, I think it might have been last week, the difference between the map and the territory. The map of Texas, Texas, well, here's Houston, here's Dallas, and here's the roads, and here's Interstate 10, and El Paso is over here. That's not Texas. Texas is more complex. Just one little area the size of the map is more complex than the entire map of Texas. So the map is not the territory. Schrodinger's cat is basically this. Schrodinger did a thought experiment to explain the nature of quantum mechanics. And basically what Schrodinger said was, imagine a cat in a box, and imagine a fuse that was connected to a vial of acid, I think it was, and that this fuse, once activated, had a 50%, precisely 50% chance of burning through into the acid, releasing the acid into the box and killing the cat. The chance of this happening once you pulled this tab was precisely 50%. So the point that I think, unless I've missed the point that that Schrodinger is trying to stress was, on a quantum level, we don't know. It's not only that we don't know whether the cat is alive or dead until we look in the box. The cat is both alive and dead until we look in the box. That on a quantum level, the point of the entire argument with the cat in the box is the cat in the box represents the individual state of individual electrons. And you don't know where they are or how fast they're moving until you look. But once you look at one, you lock out the other one. So the argument about Schrodinger's cat was the cat is both alive and dead until you open the box. And the second you open that box, all of these possibilities cascade all the way down to the quantum foam, and all of these observations are made, and then the observations kind of trigger this reality, and then the cat becomes one or the other. But until it's observed, it's neither, and both. And that's remarkable, because this is when you start to get into this takes me into theological arguments. It is pretty conclusively understood to be the truth that when you observe something at least on a quantum level, on a very, very small level, the act of observing, just the act of watching it, that's not poking it with a stick, just the act of watching it changes the outcome. It collapses these probability waves of either or. It makes observing something makes a decision. It makes things that are in both states at the same time. Once they're observed, it no longer is in either or state. It makes a decision. And that observation cascades all the way down, all the way back up again. So if you accept that this is true, and it certainly seems to be true experimentally, what you end up with is a world where observation determines reality. And there is a subset of quantum theory, variously described. A lot of terms have been used. A lot of different theories have been given this term, but I think, unless I miss my memory, the anthropic principle is basically saying that if all you have on Earth are lemurs and lizards, then the stars are in fact simply little sparks of light. But as the observer becomes more and more and more sophisticated and is able to use more and more and more sophisticated observational tools like telescopes, the universe actually has to become more complex. It literally makes itself more complex as a result of the observation compressing that down to a finer level of grit. That's pretty heavy-duty stuff. I happen to believe that's true. And so then you have to ask yourself, if I observe either the position or the speed of a molecule of an electron, if I make an observation of it and observing one locks out the other, if I observe the spin of twin particles and tethered particles, and one particle's here in my laboratory and the other particle's on the other side of the universe, but they're tethered, and I take a look at this one particle and determine it's spinning one way, the other one automatically starts spinning the other way because it has to, even though it's on the other side of the universe, instantaneously. These are the kind of things that really start you to question this whole idea of what has become to me been an extremely arrogant idea of at least traditional atheism, arrogant to the degree that people are presupposing that the universe has a beginning and an end, and that it has a mechanistic kind of an understandability to it. But we're finding out in physics that time doesn't really make sense, that time is not what we assume time is, that antimatter can be described as matter moving backward in time, that a positron, a positively charged electron, is simply an electron moving backwards in time, and that the mathematics that describe positrons are precisely the same as those that describe electrons if you just reverse time. So this idea of this mechanistic kind of Newtonian ticking clock, understandable, predictable, we've seen all there is to see, we've observed the limits of the universe, we can see out to the Big Bang. No, it's not how it works. The fact that you observe it is apparently changing it. And if you observing quantum events on a microscopic level changes the reality, then what happens when you have an observer of a great deal of a great deal more intellectual capability of ours. Would such an observer be able to simply imagine something into existence? Would they be able to speak it into existence? Speak it in a metaphysical kind of way? We seem to know that by observing the universe, we change the universe. If you have the ability to change and manufacture the actual structure of the universe through observation and thought, then all of a sudden, being able to conclusively say there is no God is a pretty remarkable state. And I used to be in that state before I stopped thinking about it. So anyway, that's how Schrodinger cat is doing, Amanda. So-so, 50-50. He's okay. He's kind of all right. Some days he's better than others. Donnie Brooks, if that's your real name, bless you. If it's not, it's a great screen name. Has an interesting question that I can relate to, especially here in California, especially here in Sherman Oaks, especially here in my particular neighborhood, because I do late-night shopping at CVS Pharmacy, which is not far down the street from me, and we've already run into this situation. Donnie Brooks says, the other day at a retail store, a cashier asked if a man wanted a plastic bag. He said no, and added that soon they'll be illegal anyway. Interrupting Donnie Brooks' question here, they're illegal in Sherman Oaks since the stroke of midnight on January 1st, 2014. You can no longer get plastic bags for stuff. If you've got something that condenses, like cold milk or something like that, it has to go in a paper bag. They can't assume that you want a paper bag. This is how ridiculous this state is. They are required by law to ask you if you would like to purchase a bag for 10 cents. And when I go shopping at Whole Foods across the street, I have to ask, they have to ask me every single time, would you like to purchase a paper bag? Yes. I think I might need two. We might need to double bag it. You know why? Because paper bags are useless. That's why they're useless. The thin ones they're useless. Once again, we forget how great life is. Those plastic bags you could literally easily carry more than you physically could carry. And these things won't break. They carry tons of weight. It doesn't matter if it's wet, they don't care. Those little plastic bags are awesome. But you can't buy them anymore, not here in Sherman Oaks anyway. Instead of putting them in landfills, which are remarkably efficient ways of getting rid of garbage, if anybody's ever flown from Los Angeles just to Phoenix, you know, there is a hell of a lot of open space out there. You can bury these plastic bags in just fine. Why do I give future anthropologists something to find and something cool to look at? But no, we have to go to paper bags. Anyway. So he said, soon they'd be illegal anyway. So I started to mention, this is Donnie Brooks speaking, how inconvenient that was. And this guy gave me the standard liberal reasons it'll be fine, and I shot them down, and he said, well, it'll all be fine once we change our behavior. My question is, how did people from a nation that once started a war over tea taxes turn into a nation of people okay with having our behavior forcibly modified, and can we get our rebel spirit, hell no attitude back? By the way, I'm from Texas. If Texas is lost, there's no hope left. I couldn't agree with that last sentence any more than I do. It's so refreshing to go to Texas or other places like Montana where you're just allowed to do things. People often ask me why I live in L.A. I live in L.A. because of this. This is why I live in L.A. If I was living in Texas, I wouldn't know that we were in this kind of trouble until it was too late. Now I get to know about it first. You know, what's really going on here? First of all, the people that made this law, or certainly the people that wrote the law, don't do a lot of grocery shopping. They have their people do grocery shopping. Secondly, if my experience in line in Sherman Oaks has anything to do with it, this is the kind of law that sounds great. We're going to eliminate plastic bags because they're choking seabirds and they're floating around out in the ocean in these giant islands of floating plastic bags. So we're going to eliminate them. It's going to be great for the environment. And people go, hey, that sounds great. Yeah, we're Californians. We're real progressive about this. Absolutely. Let's get rid of them. They're terrible. But like Obamacare and everything else, now you have to live with the fact that what used to seem like a cool idea, plastic bags gone, now you have to deal with these paper bags that literally split and fall apart. You can't hold them. You can't grab 25 of them at the same time because they just don't have handles like that. You got to hold them like this, and you got to kind of cradle them. You remember what it was like having to take paper bags up from the car, and you had to make 15 trips. Now you can just grab all the plastic you can literally lift. So people are starting to get the consequences of their vote, and everybody I've ever seen in the lines with the plastic gone and the paper bags are genuinely upset about it. And I get violent about it sometimes. It's like I will just start muttering like a madman. It's like, this is the stupidest law in the world. But more to the question is, how do you get that spirit back? And I think, look, you have to you have to, I've said this 100 times, people have to have the consequences of the socialism they're voting for. You want this kind of socialism? Swell. If you want to eliminate clothing and say that nylon is killing the earth, then you can pass laws and legislate that we'll all have to wear grass skirts and thongs. But the reason that the authentic, natural, honest, close to nature people in the third world in the Amazon, the reason when you fly over those places and you see them and they're wearing cotton T-shirts and they're wearing like gym shorts is because cotton T-shirts are much nicer to wear than leaves. And so are gym shorts. Leaves are not fun to wear. Leaves are itchy and they chafe. So, so what's really going on is people are voting for what they think should be right. They're voting for what they're told should be right. And once again, it's this unearned moral superiority. I voted for paper bags instead of plastic. I'm saving the planet. You're not saving the planet. The planet's going to be here long after you're gone. There's plenty of ways that you can dispose of plastic bags perfectly safely, and we were doing most of them. Right? You're not saving the planet. You're just making life inconvenient for everybody. You miserable, low-life student council weenie. Why don't you leave people alone? Why can't you just leave us alone? If you don't want to use plastic bags, fantastic. So what they're trying to do when they say, would you like to purchase a paper bag for 10 cents? They're required by law to say that because what they're really trying to do is to get you to use these reusable bags. See, then you don't have to throw away anything. And they sell these nice reusable bags, and they're made out of canvas. And people have been reusing these reusable bags, and they have to bring them with you. You have to have them with you all the time. And the great thing about this makes me so happy, is that what they're finding out now is that when you reuse these reusable bags that are so good for the environment, guess what happens? All of the germs and all of the bacteria that were in the food when you first took it in have been fermenting in that bag for the entire time that it's sat there unrefrigerated, is now in the bag, and you put your new food into this reusable bag, and all of that bacteria gets on the new food, and it goes up and it adds new bacteria, and that ferments for a while. And it turns out that these reusable bags are a serious health problem. It's going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse. Honestly. What do we do? I just don't know what to do. You just have to let people have this stupid law, and then you have to repeal it. I get the feeling that if somebody comes along and says, can we stop this nonsense now? We have our plastic bags back, please. I think that person will win in a landslide. Donnie Brooks. I really do. In terms of teaching that attitude, it's indoctrination, right? Nobody wants this. Nobody wants to set their thermometer to 51 degrees in the winter and 88 degrees in the summer. Nobody wants to drive these little puny, ridiculous little toy cars. Nobody wants to do any of this stuff. It's drilled into their head by the social progressive engineers from the time they're in kindergarten till the time they're out of college. Drilled into their heads. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. Why? Why is it the right thing to do? Why are getting rid of paper bags, plastic bags, the right thing to do? Because they're bad for the environment? Says who? They'll eventually biodegrade. You bury them in the ground, they'll biodegrade over the course of 10 years or 100 years. Who cares? Who cares? What if it takes 1,000 years? Who cares? You're not going to be in that landfill poking around. Somebody someday is going to want to know how we live. There's our big chance. Now, to the degree that it's floating out in the ocean and causing the death of marine life, well, then that's something that you might want to look at seriously, so make sure it doesn't. There are garbage collectors. It's not like people are running down to the beach to chuck these bags into the ocean. Why don't we just fix that problem? If they're coming out the sewers, then why don't we just fine people for chucking plastic bags down the sewers? Why don't we put like a little grate or something at the end of the sewers and clean that grate every hour or two? And then the rest of us can carry our groceries to our house conveniently and in sanitary fashion. How awful would that be? I've got a hoard of plastic bags now for my cat litter box. It's a gigantic stash up in the top thing. I've got about 200 of them. And I'm just waiting for the market value to go up, because once it does, I'm going to be able to charge $60, $70 for each one of those things. And then we'll see who's laughing. Brent Cates, the redoubtable Brent Cates, wants to know. We do not have time. Plenty of time. Brent D. Cates wants to know, he says, I have heard it said that the scientist who made the critical breakthrough on the Human Genome Project, that first mapped human DNA only did so after he fell back on his first job as a computer programmer and started looking at DNA as if it were a language, which it seems to be. Thoughts? You bet. It is a language. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is an extraordinarily complex molecule, and it is able to form extraordinarily complex variations, and it does it out of 4 proteins. Guanine, thiamine, ATCG. Adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. Those things, the base pairs. Somebody's going to correct me in any 1 second. It's C bonds to G, G bonds to C, and A bonds to whatever. But basically, there's 4 different proteins, and they only go together. One set bonds to another set bonds to the other set. And by the way you stack these things, you can encode masses of information. So it is a language. And one of the things that they're doing now with DNA is they're actually starting to use DNA as computers, because all of our computers, all of our electronic computers are binary computers, right? They're using zeros and ones because we're only able to electronically store things in that state, right? Thank you. CGAT, GK Masterson, our resident scientist apparently here. C bonds to G and A bonds to T. But binary information, as on the computers that you're watching now, the color and the location and the brightness and all this other stuff of each individual pixel in my image is set up as a series of 10100010001. It's either on or it's off. Now, if you have a computer that can store things in several different states, so it's not just on and off, it's anywhere from 1 to 16 different states, or 1 to 30 different states, or 1 to 2 million different states, then think about how much more information density you can get. Because now, instead of taking a fixed amount of space that's either going to be either 1 or 0, that fixed amount of space is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 25, 35, 75, 250 million. All of those values are contained inside the same space. So scientists are looking at DNA computers because they are incredible. Their mathematical base is much higher than binary. Nobody really fully appreciates this, but binary is as bad as it can be, right? I mean, 1 or 0 means you need masses and masses of little 10100100 just to say my name, or to put a letter. This is 100100. So the more you can compress and get the base of the mathematics up higher, the more information density you can put into a smaller space. So DNA computers are working. They've built them. And they're working all around us because DNA computers are what codes all life on Earth. And if you really get into DNA, what's really interesting about the structure of our DNA is that most of our DNA is junk DNA. Doesn't do anything, at least nothing that we can determine what it does. Most of the human genome structure doesn't appear to do anything in terms of building humans. It's just freeloading stuff that's just not hurting and not helping. It's just kind of been there and got picked up and keeps getting passed down because the code is just reproducing. But what we're really starting to find now, and so interesting about DNA and the structure of DNA and genes and chromosomes and all this stuff, is that it turns out that location and so on, that there are switches. There's like a piece of DNA that activates other pieces of DNA so that you can turn legs on, and legs will grow whether it's an insect leg, whether it's a lizard leg, a human leg, a duck leg, a dog leg. You're just basically saying, I'm simplifying quite a bit here, but you're basically saying to that particular strand of reptile DNA, grow legs here. And that same signal, when it's confronted with human DNA, says grow legs here, and grow legs here to lizards and all this other stuff. So, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. I saw a tremendous thing on the structure of DNA. I can't remember the name of it now. I think it was a Nova episode, a 2-hour Nova episode. But they showed very clearly how they could literally make spots, the thing that coded for spots on some other organism, and they gave it to a fruit fly, and they just basically activated that gene, and now the fruit fly's got spots on its wings. It just turned on spots. Why not? This DNA is remarkable because it is extraordinarily reliable. It is extraordinarily reliable when you think about the total amount of information that it takes to make a person and to keep making people. The reliability of DNA is astonishingly high, but it's not perfect, and that's important too. Because if DNA were perfectly reliable, there wouldn't be any mutations, there wouldn't be any changes. And most mutations, virtually all mutations, are bad for the organism, going to kill the organism. If all of a sudden you have a gene that mutates, your nose or does something to your teeth in a pre-technological age, chances are almost perfect that that's going to make it harder for you to survive rather than easier. But it's the fact that it's not perfectly reliable, the fact that cosmic rays and other errors will occur that will cause changes in an individual organism. That one organism will get hit with something and it will change. And that organism then, if that change makes it more likely for that organism to survive, that changed piece of DNA structure will be sent downstream into its offspring. And that's good, because that's how birdies get long, thin noses instead of short, little, wide noses. Depends on where they are. Depends on what they need. The great misconception, of course, about evolution and genetic mutation and change is that, for example, giraffes have long necks because they're browsing on vegetation that's above what other animals can reach. A lot of people think that giraffes have long necks because they stretch their necks all the time. No, it doesn't have anything to do with that. What it means is that if a proto-giraffe that just randomly has a longer neck than the rest of the giraffes, in the same way that a guy who's 6'5" is taller than a guy who's 6 foot, if a giraffe happens to have a longer neck through random variation of the individual, that giraffe is likely to get more food than the other giraffes, proto-giraffes, and so he's more likely to pass that long neck trait down. And likewise, particularly short giraffes, who just through bad luck are just descended from short giraffes, their necks are going to be shorter. They're not going to have a chance to get as much food, and they're less likely to pass that short neck gene down, and that's how this whole thing works. So DNA has to be reliable, or else all species fall apart. But at the same time, it has to be less than perfectly reliable so that there's change available. And if there's change available, you get mutations. And if 10,000 mutations or worse, one of them is better. And the big thing that most people don't realize, I'm not big on the biology. I don't understand this, very, very well at all. But it seems to me that these changes are not like slowly incremental, like, hey, over time their necks get a little longer. It's like all of a sudden one giraffe comes along who's a genetic freak and he's got a neck that's a foot longer than somebody else's. Now that giraffe those genes are just going downstream all the way. And since we're on the subject, just super, super quick, I know we got off of the thing as a computer language, but one of the things that nature invented through trial and error that rapidly advanced evolution and change is the idea of sex. Because if you've got an organism that doesn't reproduce sexually, it just splits and creates two copies of itself, and splits and creates two copies of itself. That's fine, and it's going through the world, and it's subject to the same kind of laws of mutation and so on, and suitability, fitness for its habitat. But once you add sex into the picture, things get interesting, because now you need two pieces in order to combine to create a new organism, and then the pieces themselves select. So if you wonder why it is that peacocks have these gigantic tails, it's because the female peahens are attracted to this very, very big display. So it's not like the males have had to evolve this thing by themselves over time. The guys with the biggest tails have been selected. They're selected by the females. And so that trait gets passed on much, much faster, because the females the males are competing for the females. So whatever trait is being selected for with sexual reproduction, it's an enormous accelerant. It's an enormous catalyst, accelerates positive change in a gigantic way. So that's that. Now, at the end of this question, there was a follow-up statement by Christina Dunnigan, which is really cool. She said, "You really want your brain to fry. As we take in food and oxygen and expel waste and CO2, there's a turnover in the molecules that comprise our bodies. It's a 50% turnover every 6 months. That means that we're not so much physical entities as we are stable patterns. Whoa, mind officially blown. That is profoundly true. I don't know whether it's 6 months for everything. I'm sure bone tissue lasts a little bit longer than skin tissue or hair and so on. But nevertheless, we are in fact patterns. There's no part of me is the original me. And no part of me. There's no, I don't know if somebody knows this better than I do, whether or not there are individual cells or molecules that have lasted that long, I don't know. But essentially, no, gets replaced all the time. And so you are, in fact, a pattern. You're a pattern that metabolizes molecules from the outside and turns them into people. And that's that. And it is absolutely amazing. You are, in fact, a pattern. You're a pattern. And everybody's got that little unique genetic pattern that is taking in food, metabolizing, expelling waste, burning energy. Skin cells are constantly being, regenerated. I have a close friend who may be watching this who goes through 12 or 15 washcloths a day, and her skin looks like it's 19 years old. So there's a little bit that you can do to help the procedure along, but generally speaking, you're a pattern. And the pattern is everything. And the reason we get old and the reason things stop working is because the copying mechanism fails. This is the last thing we'll say about this DNA thing, but one of the advantages of digital information is that it's hard to screw up something that's either a 0 or a 1. If something is either on or off, that is the definition of a binary state. You can't screw it up, right? It's either on or it's off. The problem with the DNA computer and with the DNA as a language and so on is since there's a series of intermediate states, it becomes a little more analog, and analog is prone to errors. And I'll give you an example. These are the telomeres. When DNA reproduces, the strands get shorter over time. This is a huge simplification, but as they get shorter over time, they're more prone to errors, and they don't pick up the pairs as well, and so they start to drift. And then the problem is that the pattern is drifting, and then this drifted pattern becomes the new pattern, and that induces even more errors, and so on and so on and so on. So the way you can look at this is the way you can look at the difference between analog and digital is kind of simple, but let's just say I've got this piece of paper here. This is the original. And let's say I put it in the copying machine, I make a copy, right? And that copy goes off. I put the original in the machine, make a copy, that copy goes off. Put the original machine, make a copy, that copy goes off. That is kind of a digital reproduction. That's not how it works in biology. The way it works in biology is if I take a photocopy and put it in the copying machine and photocopy it, then that copy becomes the next generation. So the original's gone now. It doesn't exist anymore. So now I've got the copy. And whatever little blurs and little tiny little specks of dust may have been on the original are now on the copy. And now I make a copy of the copy, and all of those errors are compounded with the new errors, the new bits of dirt, new slightly out of focus, new slightly out of alignment. Those errors go into copy number 3. Now I have to make copy number 3 becomes the new original. We make copies from that. If you have a photocopy like this, and you tell a copy machine to make 1,000 copies, all the copies are going to look great. But if you take a piece of paper like this, you photocopy it once, you take the copy out of the photocopy tray, put that in the tray where the original was, throw the original away, make another copy, take that copy, put that in the tray, throw that one away. By the time you get to 10 copies, you will have a very hard time reading it. And by the time you get to 100 copies, it's just gray. It's just gray goo. Nothing there. The errors are included, and the errors expand. And the faster the errors expand, the fuzzier it gets. So things just fall apart, and that's what's happening to me right now in front of your eyes. I used to be a relatively well-preserved individual, and everything's just falling apart. Eyes don't work anymore. Teeth are all brand new. These are nice. These are enamel, in steel. They're going to last a lot longer than my original teeth would have. So it's got its pluses and its benefits, this DNA stuff. But as I think Carl Sagan used to say, there are many, many cameras. Virtually every camera in the world today, even the cheapest little cameras, are far better than the human eye. they're flat depth of field. Our eyes are only in sharp focus. Right, what we're looking at, our peripheral vision is soft. If you looked at the world on a TV screen through the human eye as a camera, you'd be appalled at how awful it is. And as Carl Sagan said, it's true that the human eye is a poor camera compared to one made out of glass and steel and all that other stuff. But for something that's made out of water over time by random selection, it's pretty damn impressive. And it is. Made out of Jell-O. The whole thing. Not bad. So, moving on here. How are we doing on time? Just out of curiosity. We're an hour in. We'll do another half hour and we'll call it a day. Jack Reed says, but seriously, correlation between light, truth, knowledge, fire, electricity, energy, and heat versus darkness, absence of heat, absence of energy, ignorance, void of space. One equals life, the other equals death, and there is a correlation with morality and the decisions we all make. Are the choices we make creative in their power, or are they destructive? Profound question. A question I had a chance to, prior to reading this, not too long ago, had a chance to talk about this at one of my speaking events. There's a lot of despair out there. People are watching the world unravel. And it's unraveling, by the way, for the same reason that DNA unravels. Morality and standards unravel the same way that DNA unravels and we age. We make a copy of the culture, and the cultural copy contains errors and drift, and those errors become the new template for the next generation, and those errors and drift increase, and things get worse. We get our technology gets better because the technology is ratcheted upwards by our desire for things to work, but the people get dumber. I don't think any of us are as well educated as a person who came out of school in 1900. We may have access to more information, but how to use that information as a general rule, I don't think we're nearly as well equipped. And as I forget who it was, it might have been Victor Davis Hanson or some historian said, if you took a Greek statesman from 300 BC or 1000 BC, put him in a room today, you'd be amazed at how much he would be able to talk about. So anyway, I don't know how I got off on that, but I was talking about this idea to people, where people are feeling a sense of despair and loss and fear. Tammy Bruce said to me once at an event, a Tea Party event back in 2009 in Phoenix, she said, have you ever been amazed at how easy it is to flip a liberal? I said, actually, you're right. She goes, I'll talk to them for 15 minutes and they're rock-solid conservatives because everything they believe is wrong. Because it's provably wrong, and because it has to be consistently provably wrong, which is why they can't bear to listen to us. That's why we have to be taken off the air. That's why Rush Limbaugh has to be silenced. That's why Glenn Beck has to be boycotted, because if you start to put signal into that noise, it doesn't work. It's got to be all noise all the time, and otherwise a signal starts a chain reaction. And that chain reaction leads to you starting to think about some of your fundamental assumptions, and then you don't have any friends anymore, and then you don't have any identity anymore, so we can't allow that to happen. But we conservatives, since we're so demonized, we get attacked every day, so we have to be prepared to defend ourselves. We know what the attacks on our belief system are. To the degree that they're accurate, we correct our belief systems. Most of them aren't accurate, and so we're able to defend against that argument. And so it's not a question of, hey, I've got an opinion about this, and you've got an opinion about this. I say this all the time. My opinion about capitalism is no more valid than your opinion about socialism. But what is more valid is, if you go down to the Straits of Florida, all the rafts are going one way. Nobody's getting on the boats, and nobody's inflating inner tubes and leaving Fort Lauderdale to go south for the free health care. It's not 60-40, although if it were 60-40, we'd be winning. You could say capitalism was better if for every 40 rafts that came north, for every 40 rafts that went south to Cuba, 60 came north to capitalism. You'd say, yeah, capitalism's better than socialism by a 60-40 ratio. But it's not 60-40, and it's not 90-10. It's not that 90 rafts are coming north and 10 are going south. It's not 95-5, and it's not 99-1. It's 100% of the rafts. 100% of the rafts are going from there to here. No one's going from here to there. No one. No one. No one ever got shot going over the Berlin Wall to get into East Berlin. Not once, not ever. That's not an opinion anymore. That's the truth. That's truth. That's light. So Tammy said, that one of the problems with the left, and one of the things that they have so much work to do, is that she said they have to paper over all the windows all the time. And I think that's exactly what they have to do. They have to keep the room dark. And whenever there's a rip in the curtains, they got to get over there with tape right away to keep it dark. Because as long as there's no external truth to measure, you believe whatever you want to. If you want to believe people can levitate, that's great. The fact that you don't see any evidence of people levitating shouldn't slow you down. If you want to believe people can levitate, if you want to believe that thinking about a certain color will make your crops grow, swell. Until it comes time to actually grow out and grow crops. Then all of a sudden, nature has a vote. And this is why I've also said that I can have an opinion on a map of where we are, and you can have an opinion on a map of where we are, and none of that matters if we're down below. But once we come up on the deck and we look at the coastline, then nature gets a vote. And the problem with progressives is a progressive will look at the coastline and the map, and they won't be in agreement. And the progressive made the map, so the progressive will say that the coastline is wrong. I don't care that there's a river delta there. My map says there's a mountain range, so there's a mountain range. There's something wrong with the coastline. That's what we're seeing with global warming, right? It's not global warming anymore, it's climate change. Climate has always been changing. The reason it's not called global warming anymore is because global warming is not happening anymore. Happened for a while there, 15 years. It's not happening now. And the arrogance of the people who have this worldview is, I've made a computer model about the Earth's atmosphere. Terrific. Is your model producing the same temperatures that we're seeing in the real world? No, there's a discrepancy between my computer model's output and the actual atmosphere. What does that tell you? It tells me that the atmosphere is wrong. There's something wrong with the atmosphere. Can't be your model, huh? No. I wrote the model. I got everything completely covered. I have absolutely got the model covered. I've covered every single thing. The model's correct. It's the atmosphere that's wrong. My map is perfect. I drew the map myself. I spent 100 years on the map. I colored and everything very carefully. No, the map is correct. It's the coastline that's wrong. That's progressives. So Tammy said that they have to keep papering up the windows to keep the light out, and it's true. And this led me to some thoughts that are really profound thoughts, and that is that I'm not the first person to think of this, but should give you some comfort. Darkness has no power. There is no such thing as a darkness generator. You can't project darkness on a wall. You can't turn a device on that makes a room dark. Darkness doesn't have any power. Darkness is utterly, utterly, utterly powerless. Darkness is simply the absence of light. And darkness has no force. All you can do is turn off the light. You can't turn on the darkness. That's a profound, 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 profound thing to think about. It's true. Darkness is negative. Darkness does not have force. If you were to take the Super Bowl and paper up all the windows and seal all the doors so that not any light could get in there, you could take a birthday candle and light it on the 50-yard line, and that candle would light up the entire Super Bowl. Wouldn't light it up very brightly, but it would light it. And if you had, sufficiently good intensification goggles, you could see in that light given by that one little birthday candle on the 50-yard line of a darkened Super Bowl. The smallest light will light the darkness. Courage has a presence that cowardice doesn't, I think. These things are positive forces, and we generate them. So when you talk about fighting darkness, it's a terrifying and overwhelming and apparently hopeless crusade until you realize that there is no darkness. The darkness doesn't exist. The only reason that people live in darkness is because no one turned on the light. And once you understand that all you have to do is turn on the light, all you have to do is speak the truth, you light up the whole room. They can't counter the truth. There is no anti-truth. There is no anti-truth. There's a lie, but a lie can be disproven. And a great example, as I said, is which way are the rafts going, man? Because if the rafts are going all south, I'm going to start changing my mind about the relative values of capitalism and socialism and communism. But they're not. And they're not 50-50, they're not 60-40. That's why I'm such a staunch capitalist, because every single one of the people who are risking their lives in the 90 miles of shark-infested waters are risking their lives to go one way. 100% of them are risking their lives to go that one way, and none of them are going the other way. That tells me something profound. And that's it. That's a truth. They can't defeat that argument. There is no defeating that argument. No one ever risked their lives or was shot dead to get to socialism. It's never happened. Ever. Lots of people have been shot dead trying to get out of socialism to come to capitalism. No one's ever been shot dead going to socialism. What does that tell you? It tells me a lot. Moving on here. Joshua Argian says, is there any way, short of civilization collapse, to inspire young men to build man skills? Yes. You can just tell them it's important. I think probably if it were up to me to convince society on how to bring out masculine values, I would convince young men that this is the quickest way to get the attention of young women. Because frankly, the destruction of masculinity has been accomplished because the forces that are in favor of destroying traditional masculinity have convinced young men that this is what young women want. And I guess some young women want it, but they don't seem to. As a general rule, like this kind of our selected rabbit man, I don't need to tell you that, the bad guy, the bad boy, always seems to ride in on his motorcycle, and the girls just get weak in the knees and off they go, because they're wired for it, and there's a good reason why they're wired for it, because the guy who comes in on the motorcycle in the black leather, who's smoking a cigarette and is not particularly concerned with what anybody has to say, is more likely to be able to protect that female from lions and tigers and bears than the nice guy holding the flowers. And that goes back a lot longer than language, and it goes back all the way. It goes all the way back. Lizards have this characteristic. Big, strong lizards get the girls more often than the little scrawny lizards do. It's primeval, and it's in the DNA, and it's in the DNA for a reason. So the lever I would use to teach it to young men is to come out and say to them, boys, everything you've been told, I'm talking about young kids today now, everything you've been told about being boys is wrong. You're supposed to go out there. You're supposed to run around out there. You're supposed to make noise. You're supposed to grab sticks and use them as guns. You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to be fast. You're supposed to be a little reckless. You're supposed to be a little dangerous. You're supposed to be a little daring. You're supposed to be adventurous. When things go south, you need to lead. You're the ones who are supposed to go, not the girls. You are supposed to go. That's why you want to go. But you've been told you shouldn't go. You've been told it's not sharing and caring and kind and all of these other feminine virtues, which certainly have their place. I've seen societies that are overly masculine, and Nazi Germany is one of them. I don't particularly care to live there. But an overly feminized society is not good either. And there's a number of reasons why that's not good either. One of the questions I wanted to work in here, and I think I might have just moved it, so I'll see if I can find it real quick here. Because I wanted to put these two things together. Where did it go? I'm sorry, just give me 1 second here. Oh, here it is. Let's tie this into this business about masculinity, so we can deal with them both in the same thing. Michelle Tongyai says, last week Max Wild posted women, one word question. And Michelle writes, as a member of the fairer sex, I find this is probably the most thought-provoking question asked. Dare it be answered? Yes, it dare. Could prove to be very entertaining. Who knows? I might even learn something. So let's just take a look. Somebody asked about why masculine values are disappearing and how can we get them back. Somebody said women, the fair sex, and what do you have to say about that? Look, you have to start with the rafts, right? You have to start with the rafts. What is knowably true? You can deny it all you want to, but what's knowably true? What has the same force of evidentiary weight as the fact that every single raft in the Strait of Cuba is going north to capitalism, not south to socialism? That's profound truth in action. So how do you deal with the difference of the sexes and sexual roles and all the other stuff? You got to start looking for this fundamental biological real-world truth. The fundamental biological real-world truth about men and women, starting position is that men are far stronger than women and far faster. Now, if you're going to say, hey, I know a woman who can outrun a guy, I know some women can outrun some guys too, you're arguing the exception, which means you're wrong. Doesn't mean that every single man is faster than every single woman, but here's what it does mean. If you look at the women's times for the Olympics, if you look at the fastest track time for the women in the Olympics, if you look at the fastest time that a woman has ever run the 100-meter dash, the all-time Olympic record set just whenever the last Olympic was, the current standing record, you will find that virtually every college track team in America has several males that can beat that time. Many high schools have males that can beat that time. Many high schools. There are literally millions of men who are faster than the fastest women in the world. Millions, probably much more than that. You can't argue with that. Likewise for strength and weight. You just can't do it. As a matter of fact, hate to rain on people's parade, but since we are getting into kind of a boy-bashing era here, let's get a little bit of balance back. Hate to break this to you, folks, of both sexes, but the reason there are women's categories in the Olympics are because for virtually every sport in the Olympics, if there wasn't a women's category, there would be no women in the Olympics. If you're running 10 people, the 10 fastest individuals, every one of them will be male. The 10 strongest individuals, every one of them will be male. If you're looking at the 10 farthest javelin throwers on the planet, every one of them will be male, without exception. It's absolutely true. So you have to start there. And if you don't start there, nothing else will make sense. Feminism tries to tell you this isn't true. Feminism tries to convince you there's no difference between the sexes, but it's just not true. And where feminism starts to go wrong is when they stop saying things that make perfect sense to me and are just a fundamental function of individual human justice, which is if person A does the exact same job as person B, they should get paid the same amount of money. Couldn't agree more. But this 79 cents gap between what women supposedly make on average, 79 cents on the dollar that every man makes, is not due to the fact that, sweetheart, you know what, you're just a broad and I'm just going to pay you less. That doesn't happen anymore, and it hasn't happened for 40 years. Men do earn slightly more than women in our society because men work longer hours and do more dangerous jobs. There's where that difference comes from. So where does that take you? Well, it takes you into some interesting places. When you are talking about feminism as equal rights for individuals, I'm a feminist. When you're talking about feminism as equal pay for equal work, I'm a feminist to the degree that I'm an individualist and I believe in justice. But when you start saying things that modern feminists say, that there is no difference between men and women physically, psychologically, then you're just provably wrong. You look at the records for high school boys, they're faster than the fastest women in the world. How do you answer that? You don't. You're just not allowed to ask that question. It's a misogynist question. No, it's not. There would be no women in the Olympics if there wasn't a women's category for the Olympics. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that men are stronger and faster than women are, among other things. And when the requirements to be a member of a police force or a fire department or a military unit go from the ability to do 40 push-ups to being able to do 3 minutes of or 30 seconds of hanging from a bar, you're engineering society along the ways that society wasn't meant to be engineered. Now, here's where it starts to get interesting. Up until very recently, certainly it didn't even begin till the industrial age, so we're talking 200-300 years ago, is the very beginning. The physical weakness of women relative to men meant that there were jobs that men could do that women couldn't do. They just weren't strong enough to do it realistically, consistently, and methodically throughout society. As the industrial age comes along and machines and sources of energy other than muscle power become more and more available, turns out that a woman can drive a car as fast as a man can drive a car. There might be some difference in reflexes, but for the sake of a straight line thing, a person hitting an accelerator will make that car go as fast as the next person, and women being slightly lighter than men on general, maybe that car would even go faster with a woman behind the wheel. But the point is, you're now using an external source of energy other than muscle power. So now all of a sudden, the differences between the sexes gets considerably smaller, and in modern society, where physical strength is not terribly important for most of the jobs we do, and where the willingness to endure danger is also not terribly selected for on a daily basis. We have law and civilization and police forces and all that other stuff. then the traditional male dominance begins to go away. The dominance of being bigger and stronger. And so these traditional roles begin to fade away. And what we're starting to see now in this post-feminist world, I think, is we're starting to see very unhappy women and very unhappy men. And that in itself is a tragedy. But I do find it really ironic and really, actually there's too much schadenfreude in here for me to really get angry about it, because it was a couple weeks ago now, there was an article in New Yorker magazine or some Esquire or something like this. It was written by a feminist, and basically she was complaining that men were not helping her with her carry-on bag. They weren't helping her get her carry-on bag up into the compartment or down out of the compartment, and those that did help her get her carry-on bag up or down out of the compartment hit on her, and one or two of them asked her for her number, and she said, What's the matter with you men? Why can't you just get the bag down without hitting on me for my phone number? And I'm thinking to myself, darling, what the hell do we owe you? Why should we go to the physical pain and labor of getting your bag down if you're not going to give us your phone number? And what puts you in this moral position that says that I'm obligated to get this bag down for you, use my superior strength, which has always been the key to mating success, in exchange for nothing from you? What are you giving me? Nothing. You want to make an exchange for nothing? Why don't you give me your phone number and get your own damn bag down? Reproducing is more fun than lifting heavy objects. It is if you're doing it right anyway. So, where do you get off with this attitude? It's really coming down to it, right? Because the traditional gender roles that have worked so well for so long were on some level beyond salary and opportunity. There was a certain reciprocity in there. Look, I'm not saying I don't want to go back to a world where women had a choice of being a nurse or a teacher. We have liberated 50% of the population's creativity and hard work, and it's an enormous gain. That's why we're so prosperous. Liberating women from the kitchen and so on, if they choose to do that, is grand. It's marvelous. But we're talking about something much more primal now. We're talking about this relationship where women are assuming that they can get all of the benefits and lose none of the benefits. In other words, what's in it for men anymore? Really. Jeremy Boring points out, he comes from a very traditional, he's a pastor. Jeremy points out that, look, when you were, prior to the industrial era, if you were going to be a male and you were going to be married, that meant you would have children, and the children would be your labor force. They'd work on your farm. There would be an advantage that you would get back from your monogamy, which you're not wired for at all. Biology wants you to have sex with as many partners as possible, push those genes out. So you're making a large sacrifice in favor of monogamy, which benefits the woman because she needs that male to protect the offspring. The male's biological imperative is to have as many offspring as possible. The women's biological imperative is to have offspring with the highest value male possible. So if a man is going to give up all this romping around and having fun, which we're wired to do, what do we get for it? Well, it used to be that we got kids and the kids worked for us. We got labor for it. And that meant money. It meant resources. And if you had 4 or 5 wives and you had 20 kids or 30 kids, or next thing you know, you're the chieftain of a tribe and you get to live like a little king. And so there's something in favor of all of these sacrifices. But when you don't get any deference, when you don't get any gratitude, when you don't get any benefits, and all you are expected of is to simply lift the bag into the overhead compartment, why should we do that? And women today, and you're starting to see this really in the last 10 years or so, maybe even a little bit less, women are starting to understand that men are starting to, look, what I'm trying to say is pretty simple. There's a lot about this traditional male female gender roles that are good for women, and those things are going away, and women are starting to understand that, wait, maybe this isn't the best possible deal that we thought it was. Maybe this business of us being sexually promiscuous and letting men being sexually promiscuous, maybe this actually benefits men more than women. And maybe this business of men not having to get the bag or the check anymore, maybe there's a downside to that too. Traditionally, biology is wired, and human mores and traditional cultural norms have come from this pretty simple calculation. And here's basically how it's worked. Females are more valuable than males because females can produce other humans. Males are interchangeable largely to the degree of being able to produce other humans. The females have to survive because it takes a long time to make a human. It takes 9 months to create one, and then it takes years, 7, 8, 10, 12, 14 years of nurturing to set it off. It takes a long time to build this product. And the females are the ones that have the ability to nurture that creature that both people made. That women, feminists and abortionists, you say, this is my body. It's not your body. It's not your DNA. That fetus, that child inside you is not your DNA. I could take a cell from that fetus and a cell from you, and I could tell which was which, and you don't have that DNA. That DNA is unique. It's not your body. You are hosting that body. You are containing that body, but it's not you. It's not like your fingernails. It's not like your hair. It's different. So the traditional deal has been that males will give up their, largely, over large numbers of people will give up their built-in genetic desire for promiscuity in exchange for certain things. In exchange for family life, in exchange for domestic life, in exchange for comforts and all of those things, all those traditional female roles that females provided to men, that was part of the deal. You take all these things off the table, there's no reason for men to be gentlemen, there's no reason for men to be chivalrous, there's no reason for men to be married. And that hurts females worse than it hurts males. So what we find out here in places like Los Angeles, where you've got these extremely weak, narcissistic, vain, incompetent men, is that women are getting tougher and meaner and nastier, and they're unhappy. Men are unhappy. They're getting weaker and dumber and lazier, and nobody seems to be happy. And it turns out that the fish needs the bicycle after all, because as that feminist said, why won't somebody just put my bag up there? Put the bag up there yourself, sweetheart. How you liking the life without the bicycle? So it turns out that I think on balance there is a balance that can be struck here, and I think that the balance is, needless to say, women as individual human beings have a right to any occupation that they can qualify for, and that goes for men as well. If you start lowering the qualifications of jobs that require physical strength and endurance and speed in order to artificially allow women to partake of it, then you are doing something dangerous. And one of the reasons why remember how it used to be when an ambulance or a paramedic would pull up on a scene, the ambulance or the paramedic would put up on a scene. But now when a paramedic pulls up on a scene, an entire fire truck pulls up on a scene. My understanding is that's because there very likely is going to be a situation where the female paramedics are not strong enough to do what they need to do in order to get that person out of a burning building. And I don't care how much that 5'2" woman who weighs 90 pounds wants to, and I know she wants to, and it doesn't matter how much her desire is, she can't carry what a 200-pound man can. She just can't. It doesn't matter how much she wants it. I may want to be a jockey, but a jockey has to be 5 feet. I'm 6'1". I could never be a professional jockey. I can't be. It's just locked out for me. And the only way to make me a professional jockey, because I want it really, really badly, is for laws to be enforced that say that I am required to be a jockey, and everybody else has to be handicapped in order for me to have a chance to win the race. Because if a horse is carrying me at 175 pounds and some other guy at 80 pounds, that horse is going to win. So we're going to have to slow that horse down. He's going to have to carry saddlebags. Now things start to fall apart because you've gotten away from the fundamental reality of the two. So it turns out there are things that actually are a nice middle ground. I think women need to get paid exactly what men get paid for work that is exactly the same work. If men put in more time and men do more dangerous work, then they should get paid more for it, and they do, and that's the discrepancy. As far as the roles go, I think really start to deal with the physical aspect of it. You also have to deal with the psychological aspect of it. And I'm old enough now to have been enough through life to realize that men are simpler creatures than women are. And in the last 20 years or 30 years or so, that's being portrayed as a giant weakness, when in fact it is an absolute enormous strength. The simplicity of the male mind is not weakness, and it's not stupidity. It is a kind of clarity, and it's a kind of detachment that allows us to function in environments and in situations that we are better selected for. And some of those is a crisis. It's good in a crisis to be less connected emotionally to pain and suffering. It allows you to function better. It allows you to do more to prevent further harm being done. It's an advantage. It's an advantage to worry less about things. It's an advantage not to see all of the social interactions that are going on when sometimes quick and decisive action is called for. There are other times when it's a disadvantage, but there are times when it's an advantage. And this fundamental male simplicity in psychology means that we can concentrate on things and focus on things and do things in a sequential fashion rather than a parallel fashion that gives us advantages in certain circumstances, in many circumstances. And I think I mentioned this once on the show before, and I'll probably move on after this, but there was a guy, I only saw the first 15 minutes of his speech, and I'm sure he was terrific. He was a kind of a relationship motivational kind of guy. And he's speaking in front of a huge audience, hundreds and hundreds of people. He's up on stage, he's got a little headset on, and he's got two columns, two Greek commons, whether they were Doric or Ionic columns, I can't remember. But two Greek-Roman columns, and on the head of each one of these columns was a bust, a head of a man and a head of a woman. And this guy's a relationship counselor. He would go over to the men, the bust of the man's head, and he'd stand behind the bust of that man's head, and he'd say, "Okay, ladies, here's what you need to know about the male mind." This is entirely his work, had nothing to do with this. He said the male mind is like a fishing tackle box. Have you seen those little boxes? It's got all these tiny little drawers in it, and each drawer is unique, and no drawer touches anyone else, and each one has a unique thing in it. And the male mind is constructed in such a way so that the male can open the box that's got his job in it, and he can look at the job, and he can consider the job and what he wants with the job, and it doesn't connect with the wife, and it doesn't connect with the kids directly. That all comes later, but right now he's looking at the job, and he's thinking about the construction of the job, and then the job goes back, and now he's got his wife box, and he talks about a little bit about that, and that goes back, and he's got his friends thing, and he's got his football box, he's got all these other things in their little compartments, and we deal with them one at a time, and we close the box, and we open up the other one. So, anyway, there's the male mind. And he said, the thing that's most remarkable about the male mind with that little box is that the box that men go to most often is nothing in. The box is empty. All the women laughed out loud, hilarious, ha ha ha, men are so stupid. And he said, no, it's a pace of quiet and peace where men can go. They can just sit someplace and let it go. And they said, goes over to the other head, and he says the female mind is like a ball of wire where everything touches everything else. So if you're going to somebody's party, how you dress is going to reflect how she feels, and has he lost his job, and how does this reflect on all these relationships and all this other stuff. So look, they're different, and you can pretend they're not, or you can respect the differences and try to construct a just society where people are good at what they're good at. So I think that's really the answer to the question. Women are the fairer sex. There's no question they're the fairer sex. They're better looking than men. Their features are finer as a general rule. Used to be called the weaker sex. I don't think they're the weaker sex. They're physically weaker, emotionally stronger in some ways, emotionally weaker in others. All I'm saying is, look, this pendulum has swung too far, as always. This goes to my Kings of the Hill argument. I'd like to be at the top of the hill. So where increasing action and feminism is doing things like liberating women to make the same wage as men, I'm a feminist. But when men are punished for being men, and when these male qualities of masculinity and strength and so on are being denigrated, then you've gone too far. And the final thing I'll say about modern feminism is modern feminism fears masculinity. And they fear the negative side of masculinity. They fear the violence, and they fear the aggression. And rightfully so. Those are things to fear. Virtually all of the violent crime and the rape and all these other things, virtually all of that is propagated by males. And so feminists see this male aggression and violence, and they think the answer is to eliminate male aggression and violence. But that's not the answer, because all you will do is eliminate aggression and the ability to be violent among the men that you can get in touch with. There will always be men from over the hill in some other tribe that doesn't have your fabulous sense of moral evolution, and those men won't have any inhibitions about strength and violence. They're going to come over and they're going to kill your men very quickly because they're going to be very weak, and they're going to be very slow and stupid and scared because you made them that way. And nobody taught them how to be brave, and no one taught them how to be tough. And so they're going to come over the hill, and they're going to kill all of your men, and then they're going to do to you the things that you always feared in the first place. The answer to bad men and bad masculinity is not no masculinity. The answer to bad men and the bad traits of masculinity are good men. And if you don't make good men, then you've got nothing to defend yourself against bad men. It's just that simple. Just that simple. You have to create good men. Good men will defend you against bad men. And weak men won't. Female men won't. So, there you go. Do one more. Yeah, because I'm going to get the rest in another show. So we'll just call it here. I'll take one more on this, and I'll take a question from Justin White, who says, one of my favorite quotes is, "It takes less than death to kill a man. Has a lack of purpose and a poor understanding of masculinity ruined the generation of America." You know what? I just covered that. The ground was similar enough, so I'm not going to cover that. Sorry. Let me take the next one. This one I can do. It's completely different. It's from one of these Tiemann's boys. Zachariah Tiemmann says, "Who's the most important, least known figure in history?" I don't know if I know the answer to that question, but I think I could tell you who the most important, least known figure in American history is, modern American history. And I'm going to go with John Boyd on this one. John Boyd was a colonel in the United States Air Force. He was a fighter pilot, and he was a fighter instructor. He did not fly combat missions. He doesn't have any air-to-air victories. But John Boyd was called 42nd Boyd because when he was an instructor at Nellis Air Force Base, primarily in F-100s, my favorite airplane ever, I think even more than the F-16, just because it was what the Thunderbirds were flying. It's a great-looking airplane. Looks like a muscle car. Boyd would be in an F-100, let's say, out at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, just north of Las Vegas. And Boyd had a reputation, and Boyd's reputation was 42nd Boyd. What did 42nd mean? 42nd Boyd meant that John Boyd, somebody mentioned Norman Borlaug, and you know what? I'll make the case for Borlaug in a minute because he would be second. But John Boyd basically would say to any fighter pilot, to the best fighter pilots in the world, not just American fighter pilots in the world, he'd make them a bet, and the bet would go like this. You can be behind me, 200-300 yards behind me, in a kill position, in the kill position, and when you're in position, ready to shoot me down, we'll say, "Fights on," and when we say, "Fights on," I will shoot you down. With you behind me in the kill position, I will shoot you down within 40 seconds, and if I don't, I'll pay you $20 and I'll give you a $20 steak dinner. And scores, if not hundreds of guys took him up on that bet, and Boyd never lost. Every single time, the second that they said, "Fights on," Boyd was out of there, and 40 seconds later, he was behind the guy who used to be behind him and shot him down. Now, this is kind of like the rafts thing. When you reach that level of expertise, you're not playing this. You're not like somewhat better than the next guy, or 10% or 20% or 50% better than the next guy. When you are that much better, when you can make that bet and win all the time, you're now a guy with a pistol. You're not like a swordsman versus the second best swordsman. You're a guy with a gun. He's got a sword, you got a gun. You're going to win every time. Every time. So, 42nd Boyd understood something about air combat that no one else understood. And if that were all that Boyd understood, he'd be a genius. But he's much, much, much smarter than that. What Boyd understood that allowed him to defeat opponents with that degree of consistency was two things, although the theories came to him separately, and he didn't understand the second one except instinctively. I'll get to the second one in a minute. Let's talk about his first theory. Boyd's first theory was called energy maneuverability theory. And Boyd basically was an engineer, not just a fighter pilot. In other words, he wasn't just a warrior, he was a warrior scholar, he was a warrior priest. Boyd basically wanted to know why it was that in Korea, the Americans had a 14-to-1 kill ratio over the communists, but in Vietnam it had dropped to 2-to-1 and in some places 1-to-1. Why? Why? Well, it turned out, no surprise, two reasons. Number one, the weapons were different, and number two, the warriors were different. The training was different because the flesh is uniform. The hardware is the same. So between a 14-to-1 kill ratio in Korea and a 2-to-1 kill ratio in Vietnam, something had happened to our weapons and something had happened to our training. What happened to the weapons in this case being aircraft, was the F-86 Sabre was the weapon that we used primarily in the Korean War against the MiG-15. And we had a 12-to-1 kill ratio in Korea. By the time we got to Vietnam, the primary air weapon was the F-4 Phantom, and that had a 2-to-1 kill ratio over the MiG-21. There are a number of different things that Boyd looked at. He understood that the F-4 didn't have guns on it, which meant that you had to engage with missiles, and the missiles in the 1960s were very unreliable. That significantly influenced the kill rate. The rules of engagement said that you had to visually identify, you had to see the red stars on the wings of that airplane before you could shoot at it. That's Johnson's contribution to the Vietnam War lasting 10 years. So the rules of engagement favored the enemy in a way that they hadn't favored the enemy before, because in Korea both sides had guns, there were no missiles. So who's got the best gunfighting platform? But what Boyd really realized when he really got down to brass tacks was that the F-86 had a gigantic wing on it. It had a huge wing on it, very big wing, much more wing than it needed. And what Boyd realized was that this extra lift that this wing provided in a turn meant that that airplane could outturn the MiG in virtually every airspeed that they would encounter. That extra wing on the F-86 Phantom, F-86 Sabre, gave it such a turning advantage that it was a superior weapon. And so you had a better weapon in the Korean War, and you had a better warrior, because most of these pilots who were fighting in Korea 5 years earlier were shooting down Germans in P-51 Mustangs, another excellent, excellent weapon. So you had highly skilled warriors who were highly trained and highly experienced with a very, very good weapon in their hands. It's no wonder they won 12-to-1. By the time you got to Vietnam, the airplanes had gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bulkier and heavier, and they kept making them go faster in a straight line, but the wings got smaller and smaller relative to the total weight of the airplane, and no guns. And so by the time you got to Vietnam, you had the American pilots in these big, thundering, heavy school bus type airplanes, including the F-111, which was a bomber. They wanted to make that a fighter airplane because there's not going to be any dogfights anymore. We'll all do it with missiles. Well, it turns out that nobody gave the Vietnamese that memo. So what was happening was the Vietnamese were making airplanes that were lighter than the American airplanes, and the lighter airplanes could turn tighter than the American airplanes, and this is what most people overlook when they get down to what Boyd was really understanding about energy management. Not only could they turn tighter than the American airplanes, generally speaking, the Soviet airplanes, those stupid Russian airplanes, because they were lighter, could change their energy state faster. They could accelerate faster. They could decelerate faster. They were less massive, so they could change their energy state faster. So they had a much better weapon than we did. And if you don't believe me, look at the names that the American pilots gave the airplanes that they were given in Vietnam. The two primary aircraft in the run of the Vietnam War, the primary air-to-air aircraft was the F-4 Phantom. The F-4 Phantom had the nickname the Smoking Thunderhog because its jet engines produced a black smear that was 4 miles long and was just basically a black arrow pointing to the airplane saying, shoot here. You got to see an airplane before you can engage it. The F-4 Phantom was a gigantic, heavy, slow, poorly turning, wasn't slow in a straight line, had power, but couldn't turn to save its life. And up against that was the MiG-21, much, much lighter. And once that MiG-21 got inside a missile range, which was most of the time because the missiles weren't very good at all, the Sparrow, the earliest version of the AIM-7 Sparrow was 10% kill ratio on a good day. For every missile you launched, 1 out of 10 was going to hit. So you've got worthless weapons, and now once the planes are close enough, now it's a turning dogfight. So not only do the Russian planes have an advantage on the ability to turn and accelerate and decelerate, the American planes don't even have any guns on them. The Navy fighters, the F-8 Crusader, had guns on them, and they did significantly better than the F-4s. So Boyd is looking at his friends getting shot down in Vietnam all the time, and he does a briefing. He does the first of many briefings to the Pentagon, and what he does is he goes in there, and he basically has prepared a slide, a physical slide that's projected on a wall for every single aircraft in the U.S. inventory and every single aircraft in the Soviet inventory. And let's remember, we're in the mid-'60s now, and Americans are so sure of our superiority over the Russians because we built better stuff, because we're smarter than they are. We are smarter than they are. But we got arrogant, we got lazy, and we got stupid. And we were building big, fat airplanes that did less and less and less. So Boyd compared slides, and Boyd basically projected these slides on the wall. And here's an F-4 on one side of the slide, here's a MiG-21 on the other side of the slide. And everywhere that the MiG-21 was superior, he put in red, and every airspeed where the F-4 was superior, he put in blue. And time again, as he took a look at the actual weapons that were being used in the Vietnam War, the entire wall was red. The planes that the Soviets were building were better in virtually every airspeed engagement. They were better weapons than ours. Our guys weren't getting trained with guns. We didn't have Top Gun school. We didn't have the experience of World War II, which had trained the Korean pilots so well. So we didn't have any way to train these guys in dogfights. And with most combat, you find out that most guys are killed on their first mission or two. Most people are killed in combat before they learn enough to keep their head down, essentially. So Boyd says we've got worse weapons and we've got worse training. That's why we're getting creamed. So the first thing that Boyd did was he said, look at this slide. See all this block of red? That's where the MiG-21 is going to outturn the F-4, and if you fight at those airspeeds, you're going to die. But look at this little stretch of blue here. See that little tiny little blue margin right in there? Yes. That's 450 knots off the top of my head. Right? Boyd would say at 450 knots, the F-4 has a tighter turning radius than the MiG-21, or let's say the MiG-17, because let's just say the MiG-17 didn't have hydraulics. So the pilot couldn't put enough force on the stick. Once you got to a certain airspeed, the hydraulics of the F-4 of the American airplane would help, would actually win. So Boyd would say, look, here's a little window. Between 410 knots and 460 knots, the F-4 can turn tighter than the MiG-21, but any faster than that we don't, and any slower than that we don't. And if we don't fight these commie bastards at 420 knots, we're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to keep dying like you're dying now. And the Pentagon didn't want to hear this, and God knows the defense contractors didn't want to hear it, because they were saying your planes are worse than the Russians. But somebody listened, and Boyd started a small group of people in the Pentagon called the Fighter Mafia. And he found some acolytes, including guys named, I want to say Sperry, and a couple of others who found religion listening to Boyd. And this message did get out. And so they started training American pilots to say, engage the enemy at these airspeeds, and if you're slower than that, get out of the fight. And if you're faster than that, slow it down. But don't try to outturn a MiG-21 unless you're doing this particular range of airspeeds, because you're going to get killed. And sure enough, once it became understood where those little bands where our airplanes were actually better, that's where they started fighting. And it went back up to 7-1. Because we started putting guns on airplanes. We started training pilots with other pilots who had been in dogfights to win. Get them through their first or second or third dogfight, and they're going to win. They get killed when they're novices, when they're rookies. Train them hard. And so Top Gun comes along, and Red Flag comes along. We start training people with guns. Boyd understood this. That's why he could shoot down anybody in 40 seconds. Because Boyd didn't care what plane he was in, didn't care what plane you were in. He knew each airplane so well that he said, well, I'm in a F-100 and he's in a Crusader. Means I need to engage him at 325 knots. So I'll take the flight to 325 knots at 8,000 feet. That's where I'll beat him, and that's what he would do. So he did get the Secretary of Defense on the side, and as Wild Goose pointed out, and one of the people that he came strongly on his side was a man named Dick Cheney, who became an absolute acolyte of Boyd's. We'll get to Dick Cheney in a minute. So, energy management theory was Boyd's theory of why airplanes worked and didn't work in combat against each other. And if all he had done was come up with energy management theory, he would already be one of the most important Americans you've never heard of. But energy management theory also meant that you could design new airplanes. And so Boyd decided he was going to design a new airplane. And he was going to design an airplane that was going to shoot down other airplanes, and that's all it was going to do. And he looked at the F-86 and he said, what is it about the F-86? It's got so much more wing, it's got so much more lift that it can turn and it can accelerate. It's got a good thrust to rate ratio. So Boyd designed an airplane that had nothing but thrust and nothing but wing. And it didn't carry bombs, and it didn't carry hard points for bombs. It didn't carry anything other than a big wing and big engines and a gun and a couple of missiles. And that aircraft was called the F-15. The F-15 Eagle has a combat record. The F-15 Eagle's not 2-to-1 in combat like it was in Vietnam. It's not 7-to-1 like it was as Boyd's techniques started getting into the air. The F-15 was designed by Boyd and the rest of these guys. The F-15 didn't have a 12-to-1 kill ratio. Last information I heard on the F-15, the record for the F-15 in air-to-air combat is 172 wins against 0 losses. You just want to get up and leave the room. 172 wins, no losses. None. No losses. That's what happens when you let a guy like Boyd make decisions on what kind of airplanes to buy. Boyd also had a lot to do with the F-16, which originally was a Rapier. Just very light airplane. You look at the prototype, the YF-16, the plane's barely there. Boyd loved it because it was inexpensive and it was so light, so fast, so quick. Nobody could change it. But again, the Pentagon comes along and starts saying, well, you know, the F-15 is a big platform and it's got a big wing. Let's put some bombs on it. Let's put some more weight on it. Let's put some more fuel on it. Let's put a second guy in the back. Let's do the same to the F-16. Let's make it heavier, 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 heavier so it can do more and more and more stuff. And Boyd basically just kind of threw his hands up in the air and said, whatever. Nevertheless, the design genius in the F-15 and the F-16 is so strong that those airplanes are unmatched to this day. That alone would have been enough to make Boyd a legend, but that's just getting started with Boyd. Boyd then had his second breakthrough theory, which was even more important than energy management theory, and that's Boyd's theory of OODA, the OODA loop. Boyd spent the first half of his career with energy management theory trying to understand how to make a superior weapon. And he did. And then the real genius kicked in, because then what Boyd basically did was he said, okay, we've got a much better weapon than they do, and now we're starting to beat them the way we should be beating them. But then Boyd went a step beyond that, and as Viper points out, the A-10, another legendary airplane, was Boyd as well. What does this plane need to do? The A-10 needs to fly slowly. It doesn't have to go supersonic. It needs to be slow, it needs to be tough, and it needs to be redundant. There are going to be people shooting at it. We don't want to go buzzing off the battlefield at Mach 2. We want to be able to go slow enough so that we can see tanks and put a gunfire on them. They built an entire airplane around a gun. The gun's the size of a bus. They built the airplane around the gun. You look at the A-10 from the front. I think we talked about this on the Pictures Worth 1,000-Word episode. The landing gear strut on the front of the A-10 is offset to the side because the gun's in the middle of the airplane. So he had the A-10 as well. But back to the second part. Boyd had the genius to not only say, I'm going to design the best fighter in the world, the F-15. Then he said, now what happens if you have two guys and they both have F-15s? Who's going to win? How do we know? Well, one guy's going to get more training. But what does that mean? What does it mean? It means we're going to train a guy so he wins in dogfights. How? If the two planes that the pilots are flying are absolutely equal, if they're holding equal length and equal strength swords, how can one guy be consistently better than the other guy if the weapons are equal? And he basically said, okay, this is a magnificent thought. Boyd basically said, if one guy is making his decisions faster than the other guy, it doesn't even matter if he makes mistakes every now and then, because as long as he's making his decisions faster, he'll be able to correct his mistakes faster than the other guy. He realized that it wasn't so much a sit back and get the perfect picture thing as it was speed. It was the reaction time. And this was his theory called OODA. And there's an OODA loop. And it's called a loop because it's a series of instructions where the last instruction comes back to the first instruction. So the first instruction in OODA, O-O-D-A, is observe. So if you've got two guys, you got a red jet and a blue jet, and they're the exact same jet, and they're coming at each other, and it's fights on, what does OODA tell you? Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to observe. Where's the other enemy airplane? Where is it? You have to find it. You have to observe it, right? That's the first thing you have to do. You have to spot it. And the first guy who spots the enemy airplane wins. I don't know what the actual number was, but I think in World War II it was something like 6 to 1 of the kills that were made in World War II were killed by a plane shooting down another plane where the victim plane never saw the attacking plane. They just shot out of the sky. Didn't even know there was another plane out there. So you got to observe. That's the first thing you have to do. Where is the other guy? Where is he? I got him. Okay, he's at 11 o'clock high. Observe, right? Orient means, all right, I know where he is. Which way is he going, and which way am I going? What is our relative motions? What is our relative positions? Who's got the altitude advantage? Who's got the airspeed advantage? Altitude can be converted into airspeed. Higher is generally better because you can trade that altitude for airspeed. So now I've oriented. He's at 11 o'clock. He's moving in the opposite direction. He's higher than I am, and he's faster than I am. He's got an advantage, so I've oriented. Then I have to decide, given the orientation, after I've observed and oriented, now I have to make a decision. What is the best maneuver I can do when he's got a superior altitude, superior airspeed, and go in the other direction? Well, let's just say it's a left brake or a left high G yo-yo. Let's just say, whatever. So you make that decision. That's the D in OODA, and then you act. You have to commit to the action. You can't just think about it some more. You've observed, there he is. You've oriented, he's going that way, I'm going this way. You've decided the best maneuver I can take is this maneuver, and then rather than sitting and thinking about it for a while, maybe there's something better I can do. Do it. Act. So he does it. So if the blue pilot is making this OODA decision, observe, orient, decide, and act, that he's doing it once every 2 seconds, and the other guy is doing it once every 5 seconds, even if the blue pilot makes a mistake, he can correct the mistake before the other guy can capitalize on the mistake. And as the blue pilot, who's cycling through this OODA loop faster than the red pilot is, as he starts to get into a kill position, then his advantage in speed is fatal 100% of the time, because he is correcting his tactics. He's correcting his position faster than the red pilot can even observe him. In other words, blue pilot now is observing, orienting, deciding, and acting before the red pilot can even observe him. And so as the fight goes on and on and on, the blue pilot gains more and more and more of an advantage until finally the blue pilot wins every time because he's going through the OODA loop faster. Swell. Grand, that's magnificent for dogfights, right? Except that it's not just dogfights. Boyd realized, what if we were to take this attitude and put it on the battlefield with tanks and entire armies? Boyd realized then it wouldn't matter if we make a tactical mistake. It wouldn't matter if we were in an area that was leading us into an error, so long as we were cycling our decisions faster. If we were reacting to information in real time faster than they are, then we'll win. Because if we make a mistake, we'll correct it faster than they will. If they make a mistake, we're going to leap on their mistakes. They're never going to recover from their mistakes. And so the story goes, this may be unfair to Schwarzkopf. I've heard some evidence that this is true, but the story goes that Schwarzkopf in Gulf One decides he's going to use traditional American strength, which is firepower. It's just masses of artillery and tanks and strength and attrition. He's got a bigger fist than they do. And since you've got the bigger fist and you've got the harder hit, what you're going to do is you're just going to put them right in front of the Iraqi army. You're going to go right through their hard front lines and hit them as hard as you can and use our advantages. And apparently, this was the battle plan, and Boyd got to Cheney on it and said, our guys are going to get killed doing this. We're going to win, but we're going to lose guys doing this. And Boyd said, we don't want to hit them where they're strongest. And Boyd said, we don't even want to hit them where they're weakest, which is what you would think the military maxim would be. That's what Nathan Bedford Forrest would have told you in the Civil War, hit them where they're weakest. Boyd said, don't even hit them where they're weakest. Boyd said, hit them where they expect it the least. Now, that is a profound insight. Because if you hit them where they expect it the least, then you've got them, then the battle's over. What does that mean? Well, let's say that the Iraqis are strongest on their front line. They've been fortifying it for a year. Let's say that they hit them on the weakest end, which is the flank, which is where they expect it to be, although they know they're weak there. But Boyd basically said, what if you hit them 200 miles in the rear? What if you blew up an ammo dump or a bridge or engaged a tank column off the map? They didn't even know what's out there. There's something in the back, 200 miles behind the line, just blows up. What would happen then? Boyd's theory was that what would happen would be the Iraqis would turn around essentially and go, what the hell just happened back there? And they'd look back there and they'd see that something's on fire because they got hit where they expected it the least. It's going to knock them off their game. They're not looking at the front lines anymore. They're not worried about the front lines. So what the hell happened back there? So they're going to start sending some forces back there to find out what happened. But by the time those forces get back there, the guys on our team that caused that destruction are gone. They're not there anymore. We're thinking we're cycling so much faster than they are. So they converge on a vacuum. The forces that caused that destruction aren't there anymore. And now something completely on the other side of the map just blows up. So what is the operational effect of this? The operational effect is very simple. It means that the Iraqis never, ever have the one thing you have to win in war, and that is the initiative. We're not playing according to the Iraqi battle plan. They're playing according to our battle plan. They are reacting to things that they're not expecting. It knocks them off their game. They're particularly vulnerable to this kind of thing because they're very centralized command and control. You start knocking out command and control lines, all of a sudden pieces are just disappearing off the board for Saddam. He doesn't even know what's going on. Nobody knows what's going on. We know what's going on, but they don't have a clue. Things are just falling apart. And over a very short period of time, hours, really, hours, over the course of hours, the Iraqi command structure is utterly demoralized because their defensive plan has fallen apart. Pieces are just disappearing off the board. They're just vanishing, and they don't know why. So they get more and more panicked. The more panic they get, the slower their decisions become, the more confusion they have, the more time it takes for orders to come from the top down. They don't know what's going on. Units that used to be in place aren't in place. The Americans that used to be in one position aren't there anymore. And so the Americans are going through this decision loop so fast, and the Iraqis are getting slower and slower and slower, that ultimately the entire Iraq army just collapses, and they all get on that road out of Basra, and they're running for their lives, and they're carrying chandeliers in the back of their tanks, and they're carrying all this loot, and they've raped and murdered the Kuwaitis, and they're running for their lives, and they're all in a line, and in come the A-10s and the F-15 Strike Eagles, and just mince them. And this is another interesting lesson. It's not directly related to Boyd, but once that road to Basra started to be hit, once we blocked the front of that column and we just started working that column with Boyd's airplanes, with the F-15s flying top cover, where there is no Iraqi Air Force anymore, because no Iraqi Air Force is going to get through the F-15s. It's too good an airplane. Our pilots are too good. The A-10s that are designed to blow up ground targets are working that convoy, and they're just mincing it. And what actually happened was, this is a really profound thing. What actually happened was the Americans on the scene called off the fight. It's an awful lot of fundamental cultural decency to just say, look, this isn't even combat anymore. This is a massacre. Now we don't need to hurt them anymore. They're done. That's remarkable, I think, really remarkable and admirable. And that's what happened. So if you want to know why, Boyd is the most important American you've never heard of, it's because he got Americans' mind away from firepower and into maneuver. He studied everybody. He studied Sun Tzu. He studied Clausewitz. He studied Rommel. He studied Guderian. He studied the term that the Germans used during when they invented Blitzkrieg. And I forget what the German term is, but it's called fingertip control. It's that kind of precise control where you're just using just the tips of your fingers to move these tanks around. Fingertip control. Water flowing downhill, avoiding big rocks flowing in the ravines, going away from the strong parts, getting behind them. We'll mop them up later, cut them off. What Boyd realized was this was a way to win wars without taking the kind of casualties that we usually take in a situation like Iwo Jima. This is what actually happened. And it happened in Gulf War, and the Iraq resistance just simply collapsed. And that's why we won the war with, I forget what the casualty rate was in Gulf War. I think we lost something like 160 people killed, and 110 of those or 120 of those was from that fluke Scud missile hit on one of our barracks. It's just a fluke. A Scud got shot down and the warhead landed on a barracks and killed 100 people. We would have taken essentially no casualties in defeating the fourth biggest army in the world. Schwerpunkt. Thank you, George Friedland. That was the term that he studied, Schwerpunkt, fingertip control. That kind of precision. And so, well, maybe it was a fluke, except that along comes the Iraq invasion 10 years later, 15 years later, in 2003. And Tommy Franks, an artilleryman. Artillery is not known for its mobility, although there was a Confederate general who moved his artillery so quickly and so close to the enemy lines that the general said you should put bayonets on those cannons. But generally, artillerymen are solid and staid and kind of, by the book. Tommy Franks was given command of the invasion of Iraq. Tommy Franks used this exact same strategy. Tommy Franks took the U.S. Army into Iraq. Normally, what we did with Gulf War, you'd start by softening up the targets with air power. You have a 3-month air campaign, I guess it was, in Gulf War, or longer, 6 months maybe. Bomb the hell out of them and soften them up, and then finally comes the invasion. Tommy Franks said, no, we're not going to give them any warning. I'd rather they didn't have any warning. I don't think they're going to need to be softened up. We're going to blow past them. Tommy Franks just basically listened to Pat and said, we're going to go through them like crap through a goose. And Tommy Franks took armored divisions. He didn't even have the troops he wanted. He didn't even have the 4th Armored Division, the really good one. He wouldn't let them come in through Turkey. So he took the 3rd. And Tommy Franks moved so fast with those tanks that the Iraqis never knew where they were. And if you want to know how Boyd won the Iraq invasion, the Kinetic War, years after he died, you know it by Baghdad Bob, the propaganda spokesperson for Saddam Hussein, giving real-time press briefings to the International Press Corps and saying that the Americans are 450 miles away at the border at some Iraqi town. And all of a sudden you hear explosions because we're not 450 miles away. American tanks are in the center of Baghdad. That's another thing that you got from Boyd. You can't put tanks in a city. They're not designed for city. Tanks are designed for mobile, high-speed warfare out on open plains. Deserts are perfect for tanks. Fields, that's what tanks are for. That's what you want to use your tanks for. Tommy Franks said, I completely agree. But they're not going to be expecting tanks downtown, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to hit them where they don't expect it. We're going to put American armored column in the middle of Baghdad and see how they like it. They didn't like it at all. They ran away. We took over the airport. Once we took Baghdad International Airport, we get all the supplies we want in there. Game's over. 100 casualties and 200 killed, something like that. Right. And all of that happened before the resistance. Was the 2 greatest military victories in modern history, back-to-back, Gulf War and Iraq invasion. Spectacular. And I personally believe they're due to John Boyd and his followers, guys like Sperry. And there's one more thing about Sperry it's important to point out because you don't want to get too full of yourself or too full of a head on this. But I still, reading this book, I'm utterly amazed that this is true, but people who are in the military, this won't be a surprise to you. I'm astonished that American generals could do what I heard that they did in this book called Boyd, the fighter pilot who changed the face of warfare. What we found through Boyd's accolades, primarily through, I'm pretty sure his name was Sperry. The Marines, by the way, as Joseph A.K. points out, the Marines adopted Boyd. In fact, the Marines made Boyd essentially an honorary Marine. His picture hangs in the Marine Hall of Fame. He's the only person from another service, I believe, who's got that distinction. Certainly the only person from the Air Force. Because the Marines loved him because he saved Marines' lives. He saved Army lives. He saved thousands of American lives. Thousands. Taught Americans how to fight battles in a way that we hadn't fought them before. But Boyd's accolades were guys like real iconoclasts like Sperry, and he was instrumental in the development of the M2. The M1 Abrams is a main battle tank. It's designed to be a big gun that moves fast and kills other tanks. And the Bradley, the M2, is an armored personnel carrier. That's what the troops ride into to go into battle. It's got a smaller gun, still a pretty significant gun, but basically, it's an armored and tracked bus that's designed to get troops into battle at high speed and keep up with the tanks and provide protection for the soldiers inside, certainly against small arms and RPGs and that kind of thing. Well, as it turns out, because of the nature of bureaucracies and because of the nature of human psychology and everything else, and because the people that make good political generals are not the people that make good battlefield generals and vice versa, it turned out that the M2 program, the Bradley, was run by a bunch of political generals, and they had their careers to look after, and they wanted that third set of stars or 4 stars on their shoulders. And so these American generals, who at one time had been soldiers, were lying about the M2. And here's some of the ways they were lying about the M2. It turned out that the M2 had enormous design deficiencies. And guys like Sperry said, we can't send our soldiers out in these things. They're death traps. They're going to get killed out there. An American general said, no, they're perfectly fine. There's nothing to worry about. One of the problems with the Bradley was something called spalling. Spalling is when a round hits the outside of armor, and maybe the armor will stop the round from coming in and penetrating the crew section. But spalling means that the force of the impact of the shell against the armor, even though the armor stops the shell, the inside of the armor splinters and metallic shards go flying throughout the entire interior of the tank, which is generally frowned upon by the crews. They're not fond of that when that happens. So a quick aside: when the very first tanks were built, if you look at the crews that the British wore, the outfits that the British wore in the very first tanks that ever went into battle, they wore these. They looked like armored knights. They had like metallic meshes over their face because of the spalling, because of the rounds hitting the tank, not coming through the armor, and just making the inside of a tank just a series of flying metal shards. So anyway, the M2 was experiencing spalling issues. And the M2 had an uncomfortable affinity for exploding when it got hit by an RPG round. So here's what the Pentagon did. The Pentagon denied the spalling. The Pentagon, during field testing for the M2, one of the things that the M2 had to prove in order to be okayed and put into production was they had to fire an RPG against the M2. And the RPG had to be defeated by the armor of the M2. And what the American generals in the Pentagon did was they fired an RPG against the M2, but they didn't fire a Russian RPG. They fired a Czechoslovakian RPG of the same design, looked the same, to all intents and purposes was the same. The warhead was about a third as powerful as the Russian warhead. So they intentionally used a low-grade weapon rather than the weapon that it would actually be up against, because if they used the weapon it would be actually up against, the program would fail and they would lose their star and they'd be out of a career. And of all the things the Pentagon did, the one that really just, I just have a hard time believing. I just have a hard time actually believing it. But it's true. The Pentagon, during the test to see whether the Bradley would explode when it was hit with a round, filled the fuel tanks up with water. And they conducted the tests of the M2 with fuel tanks filled with water. Because if they'd been filled with diesel fuel, the vehicle would explode. So they didn't fill it with diesel fuel, they filled it with water so that it would pass the test. If it passed the test, it would go into production, they'd get their star, their careers would be continuing, and if soldiers were killed by the dozens or hundreds in exploding vehicles, that was a problem downstream. We'll worry about that later. Those are American generals that made that decision. And it was guys like Sperry, who were civilians, who basically said, no. No. Sperry went to the press. He went over their head. And Cheney was a big help in this, I believe. He said, no, we're going to conduct actual tests, and we're going to have the press there. And sure enough, they shot rounds against the M2, and the inside just completely shattered into metal shards. So you know what they did? They retrofitted the inside of the M2 with a carbon fiber interior shell that dramatically, maybe almost completely reduced this spalling of metal shards. And they redesigned the fuel tanks, and they redesigned the armor, and they made the M2 a much, much, much better APC than it was originally because of Boyd. G. William here says, is that not treason? Of course it's treason. What else do you call it? What else can you call it? Of course it's treason. You're sending your soldiers into battle in weapon systems that you know are defective, and you're covering up the defects for your own personal political gain. It's treason. Of course it's treason. Of course it's treason. And a follow-up question here by, was it Karsten Mueller? 16 says, am I wrong in thinking that we now have mostly political generals? No, you're not wrong in thinking it. Why do you think... How do you think it's possible that chaplains are being pulled out of the military and that soldiers are being prosecuted for sharing their religious beliefs? And how do you think it's possible that the Muslim Brotherhood got the word Muslim, Islam, jihad, hudna removed from the threat assessment manuals? They're just not in there anymore. It's like trying to go ashore in Normandy and you can't say German, you can't say Nazi, you can't say Wehrmacht, can't say Luftwaffe. Of course it's treason. There's no other word for it. These are political creatures in uniform. They're not soldiers in the way we understand soldiers. The guys who are good in combat don't do well in politics. And Boyd retired as a colonel instead of as a major general, which is what he should have retired as, because he made waves and he embarrassed people. So he retired as a colonel. They called him the ghetto colonel because Boyd lived in a ghetto. He lived in a ghetto with his family. He got divorced. His kids hated him. His wife hated him. His kids still hate him because they lived in the ghetto. And the reason they lived in the ghetto was because he saved so much money by living in the ghetto. He was able to buy all of these rare books by von Clausewitz and by Sun Tzu and by Rommel and Guderian. It cost money. He had to pay for it out of his own pocket. That's how Boyd was called the ghetto colonel, because he spent his rent money buying the books that he needed to save thousands and thousands of American lives to this day. And it's not just the soldiers in the APCs. If you don't win the fight in the sky, if you don't have the F-15 and the F-16, if you don't have air superiority, then it doesn't matter how good your fighting vehicles are. If the enemy is up there with air superiority, they own the skies, and those guys in the tanks and those guys in the APCs are going to be killed. It doesn't matter how good the tank is. He saved thousands and thousands and thousands of lives. And he taught us how to fight war. He basically said we shouldn't be sending American boys one-to-one with Russian boys. Our kids are worth more than that. That's why we spend so much money on their weapons systems and their training. That's why the AR-15, the M4, is the debate between the AR-15, the M16 basically, and the AK-47 will go on forever, and no matter which side I pick, somebody's going to immediately say I'm wrong. But one thing we can agree on is that the M16 is a precision weapon. It's more prone to jamming, although it's much better than it used to be. And it is a precision weapon with a smaller round that is designed to engage at longer range with more accuracy, because our guys are trained to kill the enemy before they come into range, before they become inside effective AK-47 range. We want to drop them. And one of the most amazing things about watching ground combat today is if you watch just the regular soldiers now in the field, every single one. It's a minor thing. Most people don't pick it up. It's enormously important. You look at guys in Gulf War, and if you look at them in the early days of the Iraq invasion, and they're carrying M16s, newer models, less prone to jam, with iron sights. They've got that traditional handle that gives, and the raised front sight that gives the M16 such a definitive look. But they're looking down the barrel of what's called iron sights, because it's just two pieces of iron, and just like the bad guys have with their AK-47, we light up the two pieces of iron, and our rifle's a little more accurate than theirs are. But you look at our guys going into combat today, and virtually every one of them has got optics. Even the optics on the machine guns on the M60s and the saws have optics. They've got red dot optics. They've got 3 power magnifiers. Why is that important? It's important because with optics, our soldiers can engage and kill enemy soldiers before they have any essentially real chance to hurt our guys with the AK-47s. Our guys have to kill them by a factor of 10 to 1. Our guys are worth more than their guys are. You may not find that morally pleasing, but I don't care. I'm not obligated to defend Iraqi soldiers or Russian soldiers. These are my people, and that's how we fight. Our guys are better, and we have fewer of them. And so we got to give them the best weapons so they can kill their guys before they get into killing range. It's the whole idea of the optics on the AR-15. It's the whole idea of the weapon systems on the F-15s. We're going to be outnumbered in the sky by 5 to 1. We've got to do better than them. We've got to do better than them by a wide margin, not just for economic reasons and not just for military reasons, for moral reasons. We want our citizens to come home. It's that simple. So I'll go with Boyd. And you know what? I think I'll make this the first question on the next one, because I'm going to finish these up next week. I think I've got an open week. I don't think I have to be out of here anytime. we're going to take the same question next week, and we're going to get it, and I'm going to answer separately. I don't think I'll answer quite as long or as passionately, but we'll take a look at maybe the least known important figure in history. He's also another American by the name of Norman Borlaug, who died just very recently, who wasn't a warrior at all. He was an agronomist. He was a scientist. He invented a way to feed the world. Billions of people are alive today because of Norman Borlaug. Nobody knows who he is. All right, it's time for me to go. I'm running a little bit late. It's 10 after 8, and you have just had 2 hours, 16 minutes, and 27 seconds of the Stratosphere Lounge, episode 64. We'll take the rest of these questions hopefully next week, get those done. We'll do a three-parter, I guess. Deep questions, part 3. No new questions. I got to get through this list. Then we'll do video games. As always, it's always such a pleasure to come and talk to you guys. So much fun to do. I love it so much, and obviously looking forward to being able to do this even more full-time. Start to make the transition once I get these DVDs out the door. Do a little more original content than we're doing lately. But thanks for the great questions. I could do these all day, and I suspect we'll be doing more of it in the future. And as always, thanks for your support, your financial support. It lets me sit here in this luxurious life of mine, my glamorous life. And for those of you currently in the military or veterans, I don't have to worry about getting mortared on the way out here tonight. I don't have to going to go to Cheesecake Factory. And I'm not going to have to worry about getting shot when I cross the street like most people do in most places in the world. So for all of you out there who make that possible, you have my undying thanks as always. That's episode 64 of the Stratosphere Lounge. Thanks for joining us, and be careful out there. And we'll see you next week. Okay, bye-bye now.